earlier, we were talking to Arise Special Correspondent James Blue, who joins us now from New York to talk about the issues in Venezuela and, of course, the situation in Minneapolis as well. James, good to have you back. Now, talking about the travel advisory, didn't the U.S. think its citizens will be the subject of retaliatory attacks by some groups within that country after its attack?
On one hand, the United States seems very confident that the leadership, the former Maduro government leadership, is actually supporting and working toward the goals that the U.S. have. And it's not clear whether the people who are going around trying to round up Americans, citizenship of people within the country, exactly where that is coming from. This is exactly the kind of instability that the United States doesn't want. And the question is whether that instability is going to lead to more troops coming into Venezuela and actually increase the sort of engagement from the military point of view on what's happening. At the moment, the U.S. is very confident that with the naval blockade that they can sort of control things. However, if things continue to sort of spin out of control on the ground, it'll be very interesting to see what, if anything, is done to try to prevent that and to try to make sure all Venezuelans come around to support the U.S. operation there.
Well, talking about the U.S. The advisory that the U.S. just issued, now that we know that the U.S. embassy operations are still suspended and they have been suspended since 2019, what sort of help would U.S. citizens who may refuse to leave Venezuela be receiving at this point without any form of, embassy on ground?
It's basically has happened since the embassy closure. There have been U.S. citizens released from jail. There have been people evacuated. There's some assistance that the U.S. Navy has provided, the U.S. Coast Guard, in getting people out. The fact that there is no embassy certainly means that there's just no sort of day-to-day support from the United States government. But in neighboring countries, there are ways to sort of coordinate and work to get people out. I would not take the fact that there's no embassy on the ground as an indicator that the U.S. doesn't have the possibility or the capability of doing things on the ground. It's just that sort of the day-to-day operations in the U.S. Embassy have been suspended. The fact that there's no embassy open, there's still security, there's still intelligence, and there's still other folks on the ground for the U.S. government. It just means that they're not running and opening an active mission as an embassy or consulate.
Now, James, despite this setback, I'd like your thoughts on the outcome of President Trump's meeting with oil executives over Venezuela and, of course, Vice President Rodriguez's position on that.
The U.S. is trying to show Venezuela that if they cooperate, that the Venezuelan oil industry and infrastructure can be rebuilt. I think one of the challenges at the moment is that the U.S. is finding it hard to have companies sign up because they're worried about the quality of the Venezuelan oil. It's very, very sort of hard and requires a lot of refining. And two, they're worried about the instability in the country. Can the U.S. guarantee that any investment in Venezuela is going to have the sort of long-term payout that will sort of make the level of investment profitable? $100 billion is the estimate, and the question is, does and will the U.S. have the staying power to sort of make that happen? President Trump is in office through January of 2029. At the point he leaves office, will the next occupier want to continue to do this experiment in Venezuela? I think part of what President Trump is trying to do is get U.S. business involved so that would create a long-term imperative for the U.S. to remain and for the U.S. to continue its efforts in Venezuela. But we'll have to see.
There are also reports that a small U.S. delegation has traveled to Venezuela for some talks. What would that be about, and what should we expect?
Learn anything from these high-level talks. Again, I think it is trying to show both the Venezuelan public and the interim government that the U.S. has every intention to doing things politically, diplomatically, and without force. And I think if you listen to the president, if you listen to the Secretary of State, if you listen to everyone who's involved in this process, the vice president, they're continually speaking about the way it's been peaceful, the way in which it's been respectful. And I think by keeping the elements of the Maduro government, they're just trying to sort of err on the side of stability. If more U.S. troops were required in Venezuela, what that would do is completely upend the country. Schools would probably be closed. A lot of factories and people's places of business would be closed. And that's exactly the opposite of what they want to do. I take the delegation going to Venezuela as a very positive sign that they are getting the cooperation that they want. And this is just another sort of goodwill working meeting to continue that cooperation.
Indeed, James. Now let's talk about domestic issues within the U.S. Protests are growing over the killing of Renee Good by an ICE agent recently. And of course, the DA in Philadelphia has warned ICE agents who break the law will be arrested. How would you interpret this scenario at the moment?
Across the country, there's very deep concern that ICE is working in communities where they're not wanted, and they're working in communities where they are a threat. When President Trump was elected, he basically said only people who were undocumented and in the country as criminals would be deported. The deportation efforts have expanded far beyond that. And I think, as you can see in the Minneapolis case, there is a real tension between what ICE agents are doing and what seems to be legal. And, you know, there's this video which shows the ICE agent shooting this woman. And the question is whether that was legal, whether that was justified. There's currently an investigation. Unfortunately, the federal government has banned the state of Minnesota from participating in that investigation. And because both President Trump, Vice President Vance, and the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, have all concluded that the shooting was justified and was not done in a bad manner, it's very, very doubtful that that investigation is going to come up with anything that's counter. It's unprecedented for local officials not to participate in these investigations. And they were barred because they thought the locals would be biased toward Miss Brown, who was murdered. So it's very, very difficult and tense situation. I think the protests against ICE will continue across the country. And I also believe that what is happening is that people are beginning to understand what ICE is doing. Of course, there were two people in Portland, Oregon, also shot last week. So it is a situation that is developing and spreading across the country in terms of the protests against ICE and ICE methods.
And how would you say that this is affecting the whole contentious conversation about immigration and the operations of ICE?
What's the top of your question?
How would you say this is affecting the already contentious conversation about immigration and also the operation of ICE?
What's happening is that people are really sort of very, very frustrated at the way in which ICE is operating across the country. This isn't what people asked for, and certainly not what a number of people feel they voted for. And so what has happened is that because ICE has these very, very particular goals on the number of people who have to be rounded up and deported, they extensively recruited, they lowered their standards, and the amount of training has been reduced. And so we're seeing in places where there has been missteps and there has been wrongdoing, some of that may be as a consequence of the fact that they've had to recruit and bring so many people in so quickly that this is what happens when you do that. I do believe that ICE as an organization is really sort of in sort of dangerous territory. But I have to say, the country is so divided. Half the country believes that ICE is doing a good thing. Half the country believes that ICE should be stopped. And the question is, how do you move forward on that? And I think, possibly this investigation, which potentially could bring some pressure on ICE. We just don't know, and we'll just have to wait and see. The fact that it is being controlled by the FBI without any state officials involved is troubling.
Indeed, it is. We'll have to see. James Blue, Arise Special Correspondent, many thanks for your thoughts on Venezuela and, of course, the ICE debacle currently going on.